Our class subject today, is I feel a very interesting and important one in the series that we're studying. It has to do with communication within the context of marriage in particular, and then keeping love in marriage. So it's really two subjects, certainly related ones, but ones that we could probably spend the entire class period talking about. Like I did 2 weeks ago, I'm going to be doing more lecturing perhaps than class participation, but I certainly welcome your questions or comments. And so at any point during our time together this morning, if you have a question to ask or a comment to interject, please do raise your hand and we'll be glad to hear from you. I think it's worthwhile in saying at the beginning that if we're going to keep love in marriage, we have to build a good foundation for our marriage early on and then continue to maintain it. Too many people today, because of our culture, I suppose, and because the concept of marriage has deteriorated so much, many people simply are hesitant or even afraid to enter into marriage. We see people all around us that see fit to move in together or live together or give it a try or whatever their term is, to simply ignore the formality of marriage as they view it and begin to live together as if they were married. And I'm appalled at people that I work with that I hear talking about their frivolous attitude toward living together. I recall a few years ago, crossing the Atlantic, I was back at our rest seat on my portion of the break period and overheard two of the flight attendants talking. And the conversation began like this. Two flight attendants were in the forward galley area, and one said to the other, "Oh, I see you still have a wedding ring on, so you're still married." And the second flight attendant said, "Yes." She said, "We didn't think we'd be by now, but it's been almost 2 years, and we actually like each other better now than we did when we were married." And as they talked, I got the picture that the couple had lived together for a while, and perhaps for economic reasons, tax reasons, who knows what, had decided to go ahead and get married with very low expectations. It probably wouldn't last. In fact, she referred to the fact at one point that they didn't expect that it would last over 6 months, but it'd be worth a try. And so now, surprisingly enough, they actually liked each other better than when they had casually said, let's go through the formality and get married. What a sad situation. And I really sat there and thought about, first I thought about getting up and joining the conversation, but I realized that probably wouldn't help any. But I really realized that these folks had entered into marriage, what should be the most seriously considered decision that a young man, young woman would ever make, because really you only get one chance to make the right decision. They had made it with all the seriousness perhaps of choosing a winter coat. You go and you shop around for coats, looking for color, style, price, and you make your choice. But if it doesn't work out, that is, next year that style is out of style, or you want another color or whatever else, you just throw the thing aside, donate it to the Goodwill or whatever, and buy another one. Doesn't that sound all too much like people you know, our neighbors and co-workers, as they look at marriage? It's a thing of convenience, or really you can do quite well without it. It seems to be the attitude of so many people. It's certainly not the attitude that Christians should have, and the attitude that God's Word gives us regarding marriage. God said, of course, regarding marriage that as He ordained marriage, in a sense, in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, He saw that it wasn't good for man to be alone. And so He made a help suitable for man and created Eve from a rib from Adam's side and brought them together. And Christ would say, regarding marriage, that what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So it's a serious thing that God participates in, and we need to be well aware that it's something that we need to take very seriously. That, of course, the last part comes from Matthew 19, beginning in verse 4, regarding God joining together and man not putting asunder. In fact, at that point, Christ gives but one exception for the severance of marriage ties, and that is the infidelity on the part of one or the other, that then breaks the holiness, the sanctity of the marriage, and thus gives the other partner the option to divorce. I think we could see that any other arrangement, that is the living together routine, having some sort of an oral agreement, let's give it a try sort of a thing, really doesn't do much for either of the partners. Marriage needs to be the kind of thing that leads to what the Bible describes it as being, that two people becoming one flesh, again from Matthew 19. And so how do we become one flesh? With a casual beginning such as that? Would any of you be willing to wholeheartedly give of yourself without reservation into a situation where you didn't know that your partner wanted to do any more than give it a good try? You see, you've not made any kind of a commitment to each other. And so it's going to take a firm foundation, a firm commitment before we can expect marriage to be what God wants it to be and be the blessing to man and woman that God designed it to be. When two people love each other to the extent that they're giving all that it takes to make the other happy, then the marriage just gets better and better. But anything short of that is either going to go downhill rapidly or take an awful lot of maintenance. Maybe it's worth it to look quickly at a little bit of math as relates to marriage. This came from an old preacher when I was a teenager. I think I was fortunate to have grown up in a situation where we had some people that were really interested in young folks, and this, as we were resting after a game of touch football on a Sunday afternoon, an old preacher, we were playing at his grandson's, or actually his son's house. His grandson was one of the participants. But while we were sitting on the porch drinking ice water, he began to talk about marriage, and one of the things he said is that it takes 75%. He said, you've heard that in marriage it's a 50-50 proposition. But he would suggest to us that it takes 75% from each partner to equal 100%. And that looks like kind of strange math, doesn't it? But what has to happen is that on a given day, somebody's having a headache. Let's say minus 5%. And somebody else had a business deal fall through. And someone else had a very difficult time and had to go to school and talk about a conference with the teacher. You see where we go with that, don't you? If in a perfect world where everybody committed themselves at all times with no exceptions, 50% contribution from each person would do the work. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, and our days don't go like we planned or like we'd like for them to. There are interruptions of all sorts. And so you can't enter into marriage and expect your marriage to last and be successful by each of you thinking, I've done my half. What's wrong with my partner? It's not like a team of mules that have to pull a loaded wagon, that each of them, if you're pulling 5,000 pounds, all each mule has to do is pull 2,500 or whatever the case may be. The other mule might stumble. Your partner may have a difficult day. It may be distracted, may be under stress. And so you'll have to expect to do more than 50% for marriage to work, simply because it's not an efficient machine. So you can see that, first of all, we have to be committed to each other. But then as marriage goes on, we have to be ready to take up the slack when our partner stumbles or when our partner's not quite capable on that given occasion to carry their part of the load. Pardon me. All too often, as we live within our marriages, we recognize that little battles that do occur, little disagreements that cause discussions, and sometimes some angry discussions, have a way of growing, don't they? And so after the honeymoon is over, as we occasionally use the expression, even in business or politics or whatever, we elect a new president, and Congress is very kind and polite for several days perhaps, but somebody says, well, it looks like the honeymoon's over when the first big flare-up occurs. And so we understand the source of that statement, that it refers to marriage, that there's times when we just feel compelled to speak out and in effect begin a small battle. But what can happen if we're not careful is little battles lead to big battles, and then big battles lead to war, and after a while, if we're not careful, war is the norm in our lives and in our marriage. And so we have to look for ways to keep love in marriage, and certainly bound up within that, and I'm sure that's why the brethren that put the subjects together connected these two. Communication is a very vital part of that routine. From the New International Translation of the Scriptures, I'm going to read Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. It'll sound a little different probably than the way we're used to hearing it. But I'd like for you to think about as I read it, although marriage is not the subject here as Paul's writing to the congregation at Philippi, but I think it certainly has its application. Beginning in verse 1 of Philippians 2. If any of you have encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from His love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only on your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. You can appreciate, of course, how that's very important in a congregation, that we feel that way toward each other, and that we respect each other and honor each other, and look to the interest of others more so than the interest of self. But how much more important is it in the world's closest relationship? Surely our relationship with Christ is to be very, very close. But we're not even expected, by my understanding of Scriptures, to be considered one flesh with Christ in the same sense that we're to work to be one flesh as man and wife. Sure, we're to take on Christ and we're to emulate Christ. We're to be Christ-like. And in a spiritual sense, we're the bride of Christ. And perhaps that's why that phrase was chosen. As we talked about 2 weeks ago, if we can comprehend the relationship between man and wife, we can understand a lot about Christ and the church. If we can comprehend the relationship regarding Christ and the church, we can learn a lot about the relationship that God expects between man and wife. And so there is so much to be thinking about when we see fit to enter into marriage and know what our expectations should be. Mike? Sure. No, that's true. It goes back even to the Old Testament as we've been studying on Wednesday night, and with previous studies as we looked at the minor prophets and the message of those prophets. What was the thing that was the parallel that is used so often regarding Israel, regarding Judah? What were they said to be doing? Prostituting themselves or going whoring after other gods, being unfaithful to the living God. And certainly that can be true in marriage. Don? Okay, good. Thank you. And so there is that concern about marriage that brings us really to such a subject and the reason to deal with it. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, man is told to dwell with his wife according to knowledge. Now, at any subject that you can think about, how do you get knowledge about the subject or the situation? How do we know about God? Pardon me? Study what? Okay. Some people sit down and study phases of the moon or a flower or a lot of things. But God's communicated with us, hasn't He? There's been a book written, and we all came in probably today with our copy of it, and it's about God and about mankind and about the relationship between God and man. And so we know about God, and the only way we really know about God is through this book. Oh, we can know, even as the Bible tells us, of God by looking at nature. David wrote that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no language where His voice isn't heard. And so we can look around us and realize there is a supreme being. But what would we call Him? And what is He to mean to us? And what does He expect of us? How are we to please Him and serve Him and eventually go home to live with Him? That's all in here, isn't it? In His communication to us. And so communication is extremely important. But we're told to dwell with our wife according to knowledge, gentlemen. And of course, I'm sure you understand the inverse is true, that wives are to dwell with their husband according to knowledge. So we have to find out about them. What do they like? What do they dislike? What pleases them? What scares them? What concerns do they have? What anxieties and worries do they have? How do we know? Read the book about them, right? Carolyn didn't write a book to give me at the beginning. And maybe that would have been a good idea, although I'm sure it would have changed. Would need a revision, wouldn't it? I was a little bit amused thinking on this line and thinking about the ladies just had their slumberless night this week and shared their knowledge, or exposed to one another, their secret pals and all of that stuff. What do all of you do at the beginning of this cycle, which you just started again? What do you hand in regarding yourself? Anybody? Pardon me? Information, right, about yourself, and particularly what you like, what colors you like, and this and that. And so your secret pal starts out with a lot more knowledge about you than your husband may have. And unfortunately, after years of marriage, your secret pal of the year may know more about you than your husband does. So again, it comes down to communicating. If we're going to be able to obey this statement from 1 Peter 3, we're going to have to talk to one another and freely and honestly communicate so that we really understand the other person. And then we can truly dwell with our wife and our husband according to knowledge. And of course, both sides will benefit from it. Jesus also was a great communicator. He taught people such that in John the 7th chapter, verse 46, when some of the, well, let's just look at it because I'm not remembering the context. I think there were soldiers involved maybe. The Sanhedrin had sent out officers to report about Christ, and the officers in verse 45 come to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they said unto them, "Why have you not brought him?" What did they answer? Never man spake like this man. Christ had communicated and taught, in this case, in such a way that he impressed the very officers that had been sent out to bring him in for questioning. And they didn't bring him. They were so favorably impressed. And so Christ understood, like God had understood from the beginning, the need to communicate, the need to tell of himself, and to convey messages. What does communication mean to you? We're using the term, and we'll be using it a lot today, but if you had to write a dictionary and you got to the word communicate or communication, what would you write? Tim, what do you think? What does communication mean to you?
Open exchange of ideas, thoughts.
Very good. Anybody want to add something? Although it's pretty difficult to improve on that definition, isn't it? Because that's exactly what it is. You can communicate in writing, speaking, drawing pictures, a lot of ways. But what Tim said is probably the very basis of it, the exchange of ideas. Letting someone know what you think or what you want to convey to them. An author of a good book does it in a skilled way because they do it in a way that can hold our attention. An angry spouse may do it in a different way, but if we're really listening, we might get the message. If not, we need to do more communication. So that's the concept that's involved in communication. Who was the great communicator in the early 1980s in this country? Scott, Ronald Reagan. Was he the most brilliant president we've ever had? Or did he make some of his judgments based on Nancy's consulting with her astrologer? I don't know. But he certainly had a very high rating among Americans, didn't he? Because he could hold your attention. And when he got on television and spoke to the nation, his ratings almost always went up the next day, his approval ratings, because he was a good communicator. He was able to convey his ideas and get across his point in a very good way, in a way that caused you to agree with him and want to support him. And so we understand the need for communicators. We just need to work harder perhaps at being a good communicator. There's so much that we need to communicate about in our marriages. Anybody like to give us begin the list by suggesting a topic? What's something that all of us need to think about when we think of communicating with our spouse? Pardon me? Children. What about children? How many to have? Yeah, it's worth talking about, unless you've decided enough's enough. But what else about children? Pardon me? Discipline of children? Sure. How will we discipline children? Are we going to share the load, or is one person going to be the designated spanker? Or just what will be done. There's some good ways and bad ways to do that. And then what will discipline be? And how will we show a unified front to the child when it's time to discipline? And a lot of things that need to be talked about. Scott?
It's kind of ongoing maintenance for the children. Like one notices, this one needs some of this. And then maybe the other one hadn't noticed, so you discuss it, work on it together.
Okay, good. So again, not just discipline the children can be a problem, but how the team called man and wife work together to get the job done. And so that's the basis for discussion, and that's certainly one of the things we need. Somebody else, another subject. Pardon me? Finances. No, Louise, nobody has money worries, do they? Certainly we do. And it can be the basis not only of the subject itself, but of so many other things. Many things in our lives come back to money, usually the lack thereof. But where will we take a vacation? What's one of the first things that somebody is going to ask in the family? How much does it cost? Can we afford it? Sure. And so we're really concerned about it, and it's time to discuss it. And discussion beforehand, limitations that could be set beforehand, plans that can be made as to how we're going to bring our financial resources together to afford it, will eliminate a whole lot of the stress while we're actually taking a vacation. Buying a new house, buying a new car, having another child. A lot of things that we discuss all relate to can we afford it, or how can we afford it. And so it's really important. Natalie?
Goals are really, with children and with finances and everything, are kind of all tied together. We discuss our goals, and these are all finances, and these children are all accessories for our long-term and our short-term goals.
I agree. I don't know if you heard Natalie, but she's saying that our goals, and I might add our expectations of the goals that we want to reach. And then, of course, how we're going to reach those goals is really a wraparound term, I think, for what we're saying. That this is exactly what families need to discuss, couples need to discuss, and at times even bring in the children. As we talk about money, as we talk about goals, whether it's education of the children, whether it's how we'll be better Christians, better spiritual, live a better spiritual life together as husband and wife, and then raise our children to be Christians. Whatever our ultimate goals are, need to be talked. I can remember talking to a young man one time about talking about his future, and asked him, could you tell me today what you want to be when you're 30 years old or 35 years old? And he mentioned some things that he'd like to be. And I asked him, then how do we get there from here? The decisions you're considering making now, how will they affect getting where you want to be? And that's exactly what husbands and wives need to talk about. When you're older, and older can be anything, can it? To me, it's 80 odd, I guess. To you, some of you, it's when you're my age. When you have reached a certain point in your life, what do you want to have accomplished? And what do you want to be able to accomplish from that point on? So we build a platform up there with our dreams and our ambitions, our hopes and expectations. And then somewhere down here, we have to start to build a ladder to be able to reach our goals and expectations. And so I think Natalie's comment is very worth considering, because that's exactly what leads all this discussion. And that was at the top of my list, by the way, was the family expectations and goals. Stress crops up in the lives of everyone. To those of us that are working, it can occur at work. Stress can occur when we feel overloaded at work or at home. It can occur when we have ambitions that are thwarted, or we feel that we're not getting ahead like we expected and wanted to by this point in our careers. It can happen with children. We expect certain things and hope for certain things out of our children, but they're disappointing us, and it can cause stress. The problems with money can cause stress. And so we can just talk about stress, can't we? If that needs to be the problem, it's something worthy of consideration. There are some things, of course, that we can do about it. Mainly just sit down, take the time, make the time, turn off the television, send the kids to bed, send them to sleep over somewhere else. Whatever it takes, make the time. When you realize you've got a problem, talk about it. And certainly pray together about it. Bring in the source of all help. Include God in your discussions and in your planning as you communicate together. There are times when we really can't see an end to a problem. In 1 Peter 5, verse 7, the simple statement is made, casting all your cares on Him because He cares for you. God does care, and God will help. And so there are times when that's the best we can do, is just turn our cares over to God and say, God, I've got to go to sleep now. You've got it. And He'll take it. He does care, and He will provide what's best for us. We just need to develop the faith and the trust necessary to unburden ourselves at times when we know we've done our best. But first, be sure you've done your best. In Matthew 6, verse 34, the statement's made, take no thought for tomorrow, for the thoughts of tomorrow will take care of themselves. In other words, that's something to deal with tomorrow. Sufficient is for today is the evil thereof. There's enough to worry about today rather than borrowing trouble worrying about tomorrow. So there's some spiritual concepts we need to bring in as we think about what's involved in our problems and how we're going to deal with them. Let's turn then to some practical thoughts about how we communicate. And the way we communicate is, you sit, be quiet, and listen, and I'll tell you how it's going to be. Right, Peggy? All too often, that's the way we come into a discussion. Somebody says to the other, we need to talk. We need to talk about. And so I'm ready to talk. You just be sure you're ready to listen. And don't interrupt. All too often, even though we never express it that way, that's our attitude, isn't it? That's what we manifest when we begin to talk about a subject. The don't interrupt is important, but it works both ways. So when we start to talk, I'd suggest as the first practical consideration is listen well. Don't interrupt the person who starts to talk. And then when you finish talking, don't interrupt the person who's responding. And that's difficult, especially if you've got a short memory like I have. Because often when somebody makes a statement, that spurs a thought to me, and I need to get it out now before I lose it. But I would interrupt the other person, wouldn't I? Maybe I ought to sit with a scratch pad and pencil and write down enough so that I can remember my thought when it's my turn to speak. What else happens when you're trying to be a good listener? What usually do you see in the eyes of the other person when you're talking, Scott? They're listening, but...
When you're trying to be a good listener?
Yeah. Or you're telling me something and you see that I've just had a thought, what am I doing? Rather than actually listening and comprehending what you're saying. Yeah, I'm impatiently waiting for you to finish so I can inject my thought. And that's not good listening either. So we really need, and remember, we're talking about marriage. We're talking about something based on mutual love. And so we're really talking about wanting to get to the bottom of a problem and solve it, not winning a debate. But I know that it's so easy. In fact, it's just normal, I think, of us as human beings to want to jump into the conversation and interrupt. And in most cases we do. But we don't allow the other person to finish expressing themselves. In fact, in some cases, the problem is that one person wants to dominate the conversation. Sometimes both people want to dominate the conversation, and so we wind up talking at the same time and trying to be overbearing in our tone of voice, and in other ways showing that we are in control, or we plan to be in control. And so we'll never hear the other person. Has your spouse ever told you this? I'm telling you something, but you're not listening. Or I told you, but you didn't hear me. And my response to that with Carolyn is, I didn't hear it unless I respond. That comes back from pilot training, I guess. When somebody tells me I'm cleared to climb to 35,000 feet, I repeat, understand, cleared to climb to 35,000 feet. Now I heard it, I got it. But if I don't respond, then the air traffic controller assumes I didn't hear it and they repeat the clearance. Maybe marriage ought to be like that at times. Especially when your spouse is watching television, reading a magazine, or doing something that you know they're absorbed in it. First you have to get their attention, and then you can expect them to listen. But when it's your turn to listen, be a good listener. Don't interrupt. Hear what's being expressed, and then be ready to respond to it, but not before. And we don't want to be the kind of person that has to dominate the discussion, but rather one that's interested in reaching a solution. We're not going to be the kind of person that we see, and occasionally we are, that just wants to talk the other person into the ground. If I keep talking long enough, I can make you be silent. If nothing else, you'll get tired of hearing me talk, right? And so that too is one of the techniques that people consciously or unconsciously use when they're discussing something. We just keep on. What's the term in Congress? What do they do when they want to talk something into the ground and not get a vote? They filibuster. Have you ever filibustered in your marriage? just talked and talked until the other person had had enough and walked away and gave up. So I saw a hand somewhere, Mike.
I think it doesn't matter what conversation you engage in, either with your spouse or somebody else, if they're talking to you, your first line is a defense. And I think it takes a lot of discipline to overcome the defensiveness every time somebody says something to you.
Okay. Let's keep that thought about defense for just a little bit, and we'll get to it in another way, but certainly that is a concern, is being defensive when we're listening and when we're talking. Another way is to try to find effective ways to communicate. Sometimes we just say things like, "You make me so mad." What have I communicated? I've attacked, really haven't. I blamed you for me being angry. But I haven't told you why. I haven't told you what you can do about it. I've just thrown out a challenge, more or less. And so we need to find ways to describe what we're trying to say. Let's think of this. Suppose that a husband's starting a new business or starting a new job, and he's wanting to convey to his wife how he feels and how he wants her to understand how he feels. And so he pulls in an illustration or a word picture, as we might use it. He might say to his wife, regarding the time he knows it's going to take to get this new business off the ground or get up to speed with this new job, "You know, honey, I feel like I did, like I felt, you may feel like I felt when our baby was born. All at once I felt like you were taken away from me because all the time you used to spend with me, you now spent with the new baby." And so he's painting a picture to show his wife what he's expecting to have to do with this new job or new position, new business, by saying it's going to take some sacrifice and some time, and I'm going to be taken away from you. Now, is that a better way of communicating, you think, than just saying to her, "Well, I'm going to have to put a lot of time in on this, and if you don't like it, that's tough"? Which is easier to accept? You see, he's tried to communicate with her and tried to phrase it in a way that she can comprehend, or at least can be the beginning of asking some questions. I think Scott does an excellent job in his lessons in being able to just pull a parable, if you will, an illustration from life, and lay it side by side with the truth that he's trying to teach with the lesson. And it makes his teaching very effective, doesn't it? Because we can relate quickly to where he wants to go with the spiritual concept, because he's very good at bringing out a parallel concept from everyday life. He's not quite like the master teacher in that regard, because Jesus used it regularly, didn't he? But I think Scott understands that concept and uses it well in his lesson. And we all can look for ways to use it. There are even expressive single words that we can use. If your wife or your husband says to you, "I feel so lonely," that ought to be a trigger word, oughtn't it? What's wrong? How do I impact this feeling of loneliness? Or I feel like I'm having a dark and gloomy day. Anything like that that can convey the moment and the feelings of the moment make the understanding much more likely than just vague expressions. We can't really thoroughly express our ideas unless we can find ways to use that sort of thing. There are times when we realize our spouse won't talk to us, and we're trying to get their attention and get them to sit down and talk, and they make excuses. What if you used a word picture like this? "Honey, when you won't talk to me, I feel like a new kid at school. All things are going on around me, but nobody will talk to me." You see, you're trying to convey to that person that this is how I feel, in a way that you can understand it. Remember when you were in school, or you had to change schools perhaps, and everybody else was friends, or you went to a new camp and everybody else seemed to have come there last year and already formed friendships, and you're the outsider. If you can use any kind of combination of words like that to get your point across, it'll be effective and a good way to begin a conversation, perhaps. There are times, though, as we enter into our conversations, once we get them going, that we sense right away that we're divided and we're aggressive and putting the other person on the defensive. And so we need to find a way to step back a little bit and diffuse the situation and talk about the situation in a calm way. In other words, we need to kind of put the point of discussion at some distance from us and talk about it. And one thing that I've heard suggested is Put some sort of an object in front of you and talk about it. Talk about the problem as if it were just an object. So let's say that a husband and wife, they're talking in the kitchen and work's going on. They're not really giving the full attention to it, but one of the two senses, we're not communicating here, we're arguing. And we're not really relating to the problem, we're beginning to attack each other. Suppose that you go to the den or the living room or wherever, and you put something, let's call that a salt shaker. You know where it came from, in the back room, because I forgot to bring a salt shaker today that I'd intended to. So pretend that's a salt shaker. And so you sit down and hold hands and put this object on the coffee table, and you begin to talk about it. And I had thought about some role playing today to invite a couple of you to talk about that. But what might you say about that object? If you're just two of you talking about the object. It's small, isn't it? Well, yes, it's small, but it's big enough to do its job. It's square. Well, yeah, the base is square, but the height's not proportioned to the width and length, and so it's really not a cube, is it? And you see how we could talk about it, and we could each agree on what the other person's saying. It's full of salt. Yeah, that's true, and that's beneficial because salt really affects what we eat. And so even though it's an inanimate object, its contents can affect, and it's a useful tool to affect the taste of our food and so forth. But of course, if we use too much of what's in it, it makes our food taste bad instead of good. Do you see how we can have some exchanges? And what I thought about doing was asking a couple to talk about a salt shaker and see how many things they could say, even when they disagreed. But try to visualize your problem as an object. Let's talk about money. We're really in debt. We're not making enough money to pay our obligations. What are we going to do about it? Well, if you wouldn't spend, you just spend money on the kids' clothes like there's no limit. You know, it's been said, and my mother-in-law used to say this first time I'd heard it, that a wife can throw more money out the back door with a tablespoon than the husband can put into the front door with a shovel. It was a good lesson. Do you ever feel like that's true, husbands? And wives sometimes see the same thing. Even though the husband may be the one working, he can bring it in with a tablespoon and shovel it out with a big shovel, spending money on his toys or his hobbies or whatever else. But money is an important thing. But suppose we could put money on the coffee table, or this concern about money, and we could talk about it. And we could say, well, it's true, I've been spending money on the children, but I'd like for the children to look well, and I want them to be confident in their surroundings. And you can say, well, I understand what you're saying, but how important is what they wear? Isn't there other ways that we could talk and work together to make the children self-confident as they go to school or as they attend church services or mingle with their peers, rather than being so much concerned about how much we spend on their clothes? Well, that's true, but actually the kids' clothes are kind of a small expenditure compared to what you spent on the car recently. And so you see where I'm driving, and I feel like in a way maybe I'm not conveying, maybe I'm not communicating as well as I'd like to, but one technique for diffusing a situation that's degraded into an argument is to find a way to let the discussion be an object that you place out before you and try to relate to that subject and not to each other, and don't put the emphasis on what the other person's saying or feel that they're attacking you. Keep in mind that both of you are trying to find a point of agreement on the object and then talk about it in that regard. That's the kind of technique that if one person can kind of be the narrator and occasionally stop and say, well, we've agreed about this and this and this, and so we can move on to another point of view. Let terms like yes, but be a trigger too, to remember the discussion's not over. Somebody's agreed with you part way, but the yes, but, or well, you may feel that way, but then the discussion's really not over. So try to get to the point where you can agree. Yes?
I think, like early in a relationship, to learn how to accept constructive criticism.
Yes.
Being able to determine whether this is someone attacking me constructively or is someone attacking me to tear me down, and make that decision real quick.
Sure. And And really, Peggy, I agree with you. And in addition to that, we need at times, even though we see the criticism as being destructive and the person having poor intent, what should we as mature people be able to do with it? We still need to recognize that there is criticism there that we might benefit from. Because all criticism won't be kind and polite. It will be, George rung the bell, and it is, isn't it? Okay. But that's true. Early on, or if you haven't established that kind of an understanding of each other early on, then try to work on it today, beginning now. That when somebody's trying to be helpful, even if they are a little bit stumbling with their criticism, try to accept it as criticism and see that there is something genuine in what they're saying, even if you perceive it as being poorly communicated. Try to benefit from it. George?
One of the important things I learned earlier is never criticize your spouse in public.
Yes,
Never,
that's true.
ever.
Because I can guarantee you that the spouse will either be humiliated or angry or defensive, all the above. You just can't win when you do that. That's in public. Well, criticism is never to be a joking matter. It's never to be. There's never a time to air dirty laundry, as the term's been expressed in public and social gatherings and so forth. If you have a problem with your spouse, with their habits or their capabilities or whatever else, talk about it in private and talk about it in a way that we're discussing now. And don't attack or accuse. Because it'll simply, as Mike referred to, being defensive, it'll put the other person on the defensive. When they sense that you're attacking, they're of course going to be defensive. Scott?
In Proverbs 15:1, the principle, a soft answer turns away wrath.
Very good.
So if you've been angry way, the easiest thing to do is say something back. That usually came to the earth.
Okay. And there's so much concern about nonverbal communication, isn't there? We can say the right things, but if I'm standing here in front of you and in the in-your-face sort of an attitude, you're not really going to listen to what I'm saying. You're more concerned about what I'm expressing. And also, we can use the right words, and tone of voice can make such a difference. Let's suppose we have two dogs, one we're pleased with and one we're not. And so I turn to Spot and I say to Spot, Spot, I believe you're the dumbest dog I've ever seen. You're just extremely stupid, and I detest the way you act. No, Spot's just standing there wagging his tail, isn't he? Because the sound of my voice, he doesn't know what I'm saying, but what I've conveyed to him with the sound of the voice is that I'm pleased with him, and so his tail's wagging. And I turned to Rover, and I said, Rover, you are definitely man's best friend. I don't know what I'd do without you. And in a very firm, derogatory tone of voice, I compliment Rover. Rover's tail's not wagging. It's tucked between his legs as he walks away, and I look around and Spot's following him. They're both walking away because I've terrified them. We talk to our spouses and talk to our children. If we're not careful how we communicate non-verbally, the words we say may never be heard. Some of us get training in dealing with situations like terrorist situations. And body language is extremely important when the other person has the weapon and you don't. Even if you had one, you wouldn't want to be using it because things escalate quickly. But suppose that you're facing someone with a knife or a gun and they're telling you what they want to do. Are you going to take this posture? Are you going to take this posture? It's all right, buddy. I've got two fists. I don't have a .44 Magnum like you do. Or are you going to take this kind of a posture? You're open-handed. Your every effort is going to be at pacification, diffusing, being calm, and discussing. And we've had people in our line of business that have talked hijackers out of a weapon by using that technique. Another technique that might not directly apply here, but one of the things we look for, if Barry is a hijacker and I'm trying to relate to him, but I sense he's a young man and I'm an older man and the things I'm saying is not getting through to him. One technique that I could use is to say, Jim here, my co-pilot's about your age, and I think he might understand what you're doing. What I'm really doing is handing you off to Jim. And I'm going to let Jim take the ball, and I'm going to back out of this thing even a step or two physically if I can. And I recognize that my effort with you in convincing you what you're doing is not best for you, isn't working, so I'm going to hand you off. Now, we can do that maybe even in marriage. If we have close friends or someone that we both respect, if we see things aren't working in our conversation, maybe there's a way to hand off the person or bring in someone else that can talk to both of us and be of help to us. Boy, I wish the clock didn't run as fast as it does. Okay, let's try to get to the last part. There was another part to this subject.
Just real quick, on that tone, that also, of course, goes for apologies, like, well, I'm sorry.
That's right. Or like our second daughter used to do, and even while we were in the midst of explaining to her why she'd done wrong. Sorry. She was wanting to stop the accusation. She wasn't sorry, but she knew that was the appropriate response, and so she was, well, you're saying, Trudy, you know better than that. Sorry. So she's ready to get an end to this discussion. And that's true, Scott. Either way you say it, you can say it so sarcastically that it's conveyed that you're anything but sorry. But that's what's expected of me, so I'll grudgingly say it. Keeping love in marriage. It's not worth trying to start, is it, with the time we've got left? There is, you've already rung the other bell, haven't you? I think rather than get into